Hey guys, alright, just before the show starts, I wanted to let you guys know that my fight against cancel culture is still happening. Please go to the description below. There's a link titled Support My Fight Against Cancel Culture. If you want to help my fight, please consider giving a bit of a donation. All the information's in that link. With that being said, enjoy the show. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Let's Talk, a show where I talk to interesting people about interesting topics. Today, this morning, I have two very interesting guests with me. I have Phil Craig from the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. Sorry, it's very early in the morning. And I have Rob Duigan. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Marhobane. For those of you who don't know who Rob is, please go and support him. I have put links to both of these gents in the description below. So you'll find Phil Craig's Twitter feed, you'll find the Cape Independence Twitter feed, you'll also find the website there and the results of the polls, which I will get to in a moment. And Robert, you'll also find his details in the description below, his Twitter feed and his YouTube channel, which I highly recommend for people to go to subscribe to. Cool. So I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to, in your own words, give yourselves like a quick 2-minute, 3-minute introduction about yourselves. But before I do, actually, no. Let's start with that first. Phil, just a quick introduction about yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Joe. Nice to be with you again. Phil Craig, co-founder of the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. We're a political pressure group seeking an independent Western Cape for all of the peoples, regardless of race, ideology, religion, and so on, based on the democratic will of the people of the Western Cape. And look, we're here to discuss. We just ran a poll to see what people thought, and I guess essentially that's the starting point of today's discussion.
And Rob?
Oh, I'm how would I don't know. I don't know exactly how I describe myself. I've made YouTube videos. That's mainly how most people know me, and I say a lot of snarky stuff on Twitter. I think that's about it. I think people see me. I think people see me as something of an authoritarian, and I think they might be kind of correct. Yeah, I. I don't know really what else to add to that. I just finished a master's degree in crisis and security management here in the Netherlands.
Okay. Do you have? Were you born in South Africa? Why do you have an interest in South Africa?
Oh no, of course. I was born and raised in South Africa, and my family it goes back quite a way in the old Cape. We've got very, very deep roots there. Interestingly enough, in Phil Craig's current hometown, which, I mean, I don't know if he wants to share, but I know which town he lives in, and my family's lived there for about 300 years.
Wow, okay.
I didn't know that, Rob. That's No, you're happy to share. I stay in Wellington in the Western Cape. Beautiful little town.
Okay, cool. Not too far from me. Cool. Well, that should suffice. For those of you, like I said, go support these guys if you want to know more about them. So, as Phil Craig said, we are going to talk about the polls, and we're going to talk about, the question here is, I think a few months ago, the idea of Cape Secession has been around for a number of years. However, I think since the lockdown, the movement or the idea has garnered a lot more support, obviously because of the lockdown, I think, and obviously the failures of the ANC government. People are unhappy. I think that we can all agree on. However, the poll that was given out, I'm going to show it very quickly on the screen. Here it is. You guys can go to the website and check it out. There are some interesting things on this poll. Certain results. It's. I think Craig can touch on it a little bit more, but I know that it was done it was outsourced to be done. It was a scientific thing, or I've heard something like that. Sorry, but basically, it's interesting because it does show that there's an interest or a greater interest in Cape independence in these results. But I'm going to play a bit of devil's advocate because I have some concerns with this poll. And you guys will be allowed to discuss it. And for those of you that are watching, ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I will bring it up. So I guess a good starting point, Phil, is tell us just a little bit about the poll, who did it. Just a very brief description.
Okay, so basically, this poll was an independent scientific poll. It's a for want of expression, top notch. So when the DA or the ANC or Reuters, whoever chooses to run a poll, they go to a professional polling organisation. There are specific best practices of how it must be done, and this is what's happening. It's not a cheap exercise by any stretch of the imagination. And we went to a company called Victory Research, who are one of the leading political pollsters in South Africa. We specifically chose them because the CEO is Gareth van Onselen, who was involved in polling for the DA, used to work for the DA. So that the poll itself would be beyond reproach. Whatever obviously at that point we didn't have the findings, but there has been a previous poll, and interestingly enough, the results of the previous poll aligned with this poll. But because the previous poll was conducted by somebody that was less well known, then it was just poo-pooed and dismissed. So for us, a critical thing was that we went with somebody who had absolute credibility, that was independent, and arguably probably as opposed to Cape Independence, and therefore the results were going to be unequivocal. What the results were what the results were. Look, it was a scientific poll. People often get confused when they look at it. The sample size was 800. A lot of people say, well, how could you possibly have a poll with a sample size of 800? The reality is, if you look at political polling around the world, that is what sample sizes are. The key is not the sample size, it's the representativity of the sample size. So that sample is democratically representative at the most possible level of the Western Cape. And the key thing with political polling is to look at the margin for error. So the margin for error in this poll is 3.5%. So when we say 36% of the population of the Western Cape are in favour of independence, that might be 35%, that might be 37%, but there's no way on earth it's 25%. So it's and that's the critical thing here, that the polling was independent and it was scientific.
Great. Okay, so Rob, do you want to go first? Do you have anything to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is not going to be the most profound statement ever, but I think I'm just going to point out the obvious here, because that's what I think is always good to do, which is that's a third of the population in the Cape, and that is not a majority. Okay. So everyone looking at this will kind of say, will probably feel a little bit surprised that the number is that high, but at the same time will go, sure, but that's a third of the population. What does that really mean? I mean, the DA, if we're going to imagining a really, really optimistic electoral turnout at the national level, let's say they get a quarter of the national election, you're looking at these sort of simple fractions of the electorate and you go, yeah, but that means nothing. So what's more important is sort of seeing, does this the big question is then, do you have the ability, or do you think that this stands the chance to convert into a growing trend, or whether it's just a static fraction of the population who's fundamentally dissatisfied with the prevailing order? There's that famous analysis of the Brexit vote, which is that people were just, throwing up their fingers to the powers that be, not really worrying about the outcomes. I mean, look, there's a lot of people who say they're actually more informed than that, but with a margin of 2% that they had there, it was 4%, 2%. The margin of 4%, you're really sort of in a gray zone where there's a lot of there are many ways in which people can try and finger the legitimacy of a poll like that. And over here we've got 36%. We're a very, very soft target for someone for someone who might point out that it's some kind of an atavistic escape plan for bitter verkramptes. So because that's already the narrative that the dominant media class, which is the Cape University educated white left, all of the nasty local Anglos who do nothing but snipe at the peasants. they've got a very firm narrative already established that essentially it's the preservation of white privilege. And so I think one of the things we're going to have to face is that, unfortunately, that's going to be the prevailing narrative, which we're going to have to challenge going forward.
That's actually a really good point. So like that's also my concern when I saw this poll is I hear what you're saying. It's scientific. People have done it this way, all that stuff. But I think people find insecurity with that number. You know, like again, I looked it up as of 2011. Cape had, I believe it was. Let me just double check because I do have it open here. Yes, 5.8 million population. That was in 2011. I'm sure it's much more now. And yeah, so again, like you say it's science, but is there a way that you can explain it maybe a little bit more to give us a bit of reassurance?
Well, look, look, I think so. We're getting into two different questions. So let's quickly do yours first, and then I'll come to Rob's points. So first of all, in terms of is there an example? Yeah, let's go with a real world example. The second largest polling organisation in the world is Ipsos Mori. And there was a referendum on Scottish independence. If you go to Ipsos's website, they are one of the successes they're claiming for themselves is to have been the person or the company that most accurately predicted the outcome of the Scottish referendum on independence. And the poll that they ran on Scottish independence had a sample size of 991 people, using the same methodology as this poll that we had, and they predicted the poll within 1 or 2% of accuracy. So that isn't to say that this is foolproof, but it's close. It's really close. So I think in terms of look, I accept. If you don't want to believe, you're not going to believe. But it's what's interesting is there's an awful lot of people saying, look, you know what, if you go onto Twitter, everyone's very excited about the 800 number. What you don't see is any professional pollster coming onto Twitter and saying this number isn't scientific. Not a single one. We've had this debate ad nauseum because they understand that we've published the methodology. They understand it's best practice. It's credible. Obviously, if people don't want to believe that, that's fine. This is just fundamentally a benchmark poll. It's the first poll that we brought to the table. It won't be the last poll, and ultimately, independence at some point there'll be a referendum, and then it won't be settled on a poll anyway. This is just information that's useful along the way. In terms of the sort of then coming to sort of Rob's point, the kind of 36% number, and I think it's right. So people have got to have a context for that, and inevitably, what's fascinating is people see all sorts of things. This is an evocative subject. It's a subject that's kind of just establishing itself really into the mainstream, and people don't know what to think of it. And obviously, people tend to interpret information the way that they want to interpret information. What I can tell you is that nobody expected that figure to be 36%. And in terms of things, the people who were against independence were expecting it to be somewhere in the kind of 10 to 15% range, which was slightly crazy. We were expecting it to be in the 25 to 35% range, and when it came in at 36%, it was higher than anybody had possibly expected. And we've got to see this as the starting point. By no means, we've been formed 4 months. There were lots of other Cape Independence organisations in this space, but they had different mandates. Our specific mandate was to bring this into the mainstream media narrative and have it talked about. And obviously, we've been quite successful in doing that, and that fundamentally becomes a ever increasing circle. You talk about independence, people engage with the topic, they're forced to think about it, they start thinking about the benefits and the downsides, and we've seen ourselves. It's quite a radical solution in many ways. It's against the status quo, and therefore it takes people, even supporters. It takes people often 3 or 4 months to process this idea before they move from being against it to being skeptical. And eventually they arrive there. But what I can say, and from my personal experience, I deal with an awful lot of people who, when I first started talking about Cape Independence, they were against it, and now they're for it. I don't know of a single person who's reverted the other way. It's a gradual process. So what I would say about 36% number as a starting point, if we're at 36% now, I am absolutely confident that we can get that number above 50% over the next 12 to 18 months if we have sufficient funding and we conduct a sensible marketing strategy to deal with that. And I think so. That's the sort of first point. 36% is a really healthy number for where we're at. And then perhaps for a context of that, bear in mind that critics of Cape Independence all fell over themselves to point out that nobody wanted Cape Independence because only 9,331 people voted for the Cape Party. So just compare those two numbers. People were claiming, leading politicians were claiming that there was no support for Cape Independence because there was 0.45% of the electorate wanted it, as exhibited by election results, and now the poll says it's 36%. Which obviously two vastly different numbers. And one of the critical differences there, which is the one that everybody has now got to come to terms with, and we talked about it on this show, so I spoke about it long before this poll. They always claimed that Cape Party support equaled support for independence. We always claimed that most independent supporters fundamentally want a DA government. And actually, there's a logical conclusion. People are voting for the DA, but they're not getting the DA. Whereas if they vote for have independence, they vote for the DA, they get the DA. And this polling has shown that. It's absolutely borne that out, that 2/3 of all independent supporters vote for the DA. 53% of all DA voters want Cape Independence. So an outright majority of DA voters want independence, and 2/3 of people wanting independence are DA voters. So that's the key connection that nobody wanted to accept. Opponents didn't want to accept it because it suited them. The DA didn't want to accept it because it would put them in a predicament which they're now in. But the reality is, here is the polling, and bear in mind it's conducted by somebody who is extremely close to the DA, which obviously is quite by design, because we understood, we always believed there was this link between the DA and independence, and here it is.
Okay, well. Rob, what do you got to say to that?
Well, I think one of the things that makes that argument tempting to a lot of people is that, look, we know that part of the reason the DA struggles to really fulfill their mandate in the Cape is that they have limited powers. They are, what they have as a provincial government is they've got fairly good control over, infrastructure that they can build. But there are a whole bunch of things that limit their capacity to actually put in a lot of their infrastructure, part of which is the vandalism, the incredibly vast amounts of vandalism and destruction caused by people who are largely protected by the way that South African law is put up, the land invasion, all this kind of shenanigans that constantly goes on. I mean, and the recent rulings have made this even worse. I mean, you look at what was ruled on the 25th of August. I absolutely can't believe it. I mean, it's literally if someone comes to your house, hops your fence, and puts up a shack, you cannot use any means to remove them until you get court permission. And of course, as we all know, that takes upwards of a year for most people. And in the meantime, they get tenure on your land while they do it. So essentially and this is going to stay in place until the government removes the state of emergency. And I think a lot of people suspect that the highly organized land invasions that you see across the Cape, hundreds of which have occurred since lockdown began, an enormous wave of them. There's always people who have money for luxury cars who show up on site, demarcate all of the areas, and hand out those little housing plots to people who then have to pay them rent. So it's a highly organized. These I don't know if it's decentralized. I don't know if it's centralized. No one knows really at this point. But clearly it's organized at some level, and I would not put it past the ANC to do this. They have the most aggressive and dishonest political tactics that I don't know, that outside of bloody China, as far as I know. And they, I mean, you look at what they did to the African transformation movement. Do you follow that story?
Craig, do you follow that story?
Look, not specifically. It'll be interesting to hear it, and perhaps I'll follow it under a different name. But
yeah, so the African Transformation Movement, the ATM, is a little party that started up a little while ago, and they started gaining traction with church leaders across the country. because they were aiming for something more culturally conservative, which the ANC knows has good purchase with normal people on the ground. But they have their own sort of communist utopia that they sort of want to gradually impose on the population. You know, socially liberal, government, state authoritarian, you know, command economy, that kind of stuff. That's the ANC's vision. The ATM wanted to go for something a bit more compromised on the economic front, and they were pushing this whole thing of anti-corruption, clean government, moral order. And what the ANC did is they funded hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people with stacks of cash. They were all getting thousands of rands to join the ATM. And then they called an AGM to tried to have a vote to disband the party from within. So that's the kind of level of shenanigans that the ANC is willing to get up to. I mean, never mind the hundreds of assassinations that they carry out at a local level. They are an absolutely brutal, horrific organization, and they are pure evil. They don't. The thing about the ANC as an organization is that everyone is absolutely committed to the ideals that are printed on their label. So the thing of, you know, like this, they don't say multicultural society, but the Western political consciousness directly understands that that's what it means. The ANC doesn't want a multicultural society. They're very, very firm on their philosophy of majority rule and minority shut up. And so, yeah,
I think. Sorry.
I look at this and I think that what we're facing in the Cape, and what everyone who's voting for the DA sees, is they see a government who it has absolutely no regard for the lives of their subjects whatsoever. And I think the problem with Cape Independence is I think that a lot of people realize that it might get quite bloody, not because the local indigenous Cape residents would start some kind of terrorist movement to get independence, but because the government would use extraordinary force to prevent it from happening, and they would use extra legal means to do so.
Yeah, that's definitely a fear. I know that Phil doesn't want violence, and I don't think anyone really wants violence, but we don't know at this point. I did want to touch on the DA aspect of it, but Phil, do you have anything to say to Rob's comments?
No, look, it's interesting. Look, I understand, and the violence topic comes up, and look, you obviously understand from we're totally committed to peaceful means, and look, I have a different view in some ways. I kind of am probably less pessimistic over the violence aspect. I think it's a danger. My own view is that the ANC, for different reasons, and I think probably because of international pressure, which is something that will have a good degree of control on from our side, that I think as the government itself, that unlikely is going to be too much concerns. I think probably there'll be some flare-ups and I would think probably the EFF are more likely to cause mischief. But I think one of the helpful things is there's that the EFF have got much less purchase in the Cape than they have in the rest of the country, and there is a difference in terms of balance of power. That the EFF are classic bully boys, and I think the Western Cape is a different playing ground to the rest of the country. But whenever the talks of violence come up, I always use the same example. I think people always kind of think of John Rambo, and I always say, listen, I actually think of Gandhi. That's my hero. That you can only fight somebody who wants to fight you back. And I've always felt the same way that to a certain extent, the day that the government has to use any degree of even the threat of force, it ultimately has lost any possible prospect of staving off Cape Independence. It may deny the inevitable, but I think it'll just create a situation where it becomes all the more certain, albeit they may delay it for 6 months or 12 months or however long it takes to sort of bring the necessary international leverage to resolve it. And at that point, we will be encouraging nobody to fight on the ground. Just look, sit back and let's resolve this. Let's resolve this through international means. I mean, for me, the funny kind of thing is a certain degree of Cape Independence that kind of is a replay of the sort of 92, 94 scenarios. Effectively, you had the National Party and the ANC, or the negotiating, but actually the National Party is negotiating with a gun to its head. And I think to a certain extent, if we play the Cape Independence correctly, we'll have exactly the reverse scenario. We'll have Cape Independence negotiating with an ANC government, but with a gun to the ANC government's head. And I don't mean a literal gun. I mean a lot of ducks in a row in the international arena.
Yeah, I would be cautious of being too optimistic in the international arena. Look, my perspective on this is if I was going to make the case for Cape Independence with anyone, I would say that look, I mean, obviously it's an enormous tragedy. We all grew up with this promise. We grew up with this ideal. We all grew up worshipping Nelson Mandela, and we all hoped for a country that would stick together. And I mean, it's a very, very hard reality to come to terms with. I think the past few years for me have been particularly difficult to deal with, because it changes how you think about the future. It changes, where you think you're going to be able to spend the rest of your life. And I think, to put this into sharp perspective, the thing that sort of comes up for me repeatedly is that the 2024 election will be won by an ANC EFF coalition without a doubt. I don't think that there's any chance that anything else will happen. And the question everyone has to ask themselves is, do they think they can live under such a government? And do they think that the ANC can control Julius Malema? I don't think anyone can control Julius Malema. He's a political genius who is extremely malevolent. And he has a lot of power. I think the other thing over here is that it's actually a fulfillment of the ANC's political mandate to destroy the country, because their promise to the people was to fulfill the Freedom Charter. And if you read the Freedom Charter, it is a document. It is a clinically insane document. The abolition of private property is first and foremost. They believe that people should have the right to settle on any land whatsoever without permission. And they've realized this through the courts. And if you look at the I've forgotten her name, the lady who made the judgment on the 25th of August. Absolutely obsessive a socialist who sees apartheid under every rock. And you don't need to be, when people talk about capture of institutions, you don't need to be paid off. Some people are just ideologues, and they don't care about institutions. If you're a revolutionary, an institution is it's an obstacle to you. It's not a source of moral authority. I mean, I share this perspective as well to a certain degree, because I don't think that the United Nations is a friendly force for most small countries. It's an order that's been put together by the great powers, and you have to work within its framework only because you don't have a choice. And if there are parts of the way they work that you disagree with, in particular how they handle independence of small nations, then you're just going to have to face it. And our predicament here is not just the nature of domestic politics. Our predicament is, I think what people do is they look at these things and they say, well, will it win? I'm only going to back it if it wins. And I think this is one of those awful fallacies that you have is, if you want it, you actually have to try and do something to get it done. You have to, no matter how awful the situation is, if you think something's right, you do have to do something to get it done. And I mean, look, if this fails and it all goes, pear-shaped, I don't think anyone who attempted to get it done will regret putting in an honest effort. I think it's the attempt to save part of South Africa from a fascist regime is it's a moral imperative. I don't think we can that we really have the option of convincing the whole of South Africa to vote for the DA or in the next 4 years. I don't think that's going to happen. They don't believe in non-racialism. They believe in dispossession and redistribution, and unfortunately, that's just the political culture of the majority of South Africa, and you can't appeal to any other values because those are sacred values now.
Yeah.
They've been taught in schools for 30 years. Everyone believes in them.
Yes. I think you touched on a very good point there, Rob. The perception that people have, the faith and the belief, which is something, like you said, if you support this, if you want this, you got to do something, and that can take many forms. That can take a discussion like this to help build the ideas, to help spread the news. It can take maybe you standing at a robot saying support Cape Independence. It takes many, many forms. I do want to touch on something that someone brought up in the chats, because it's also part of the idea of Cape Independence, and it seems to be a very big topic when you bring up the Cape Independence. Everyone jumps to this question: what about the borders? Please, both of you, give me your views. So we'll start with Phil, and then Rob, if you have any concerns, you can voice them. So, Craig, tell us about the borders. How will it work? How will people yeah?
So look, and specifically, that's what I was going to ask you. The context. Do you mean how are they going to be managed? How are they? Where are they going to be? What's the context for the question?
If you can, maybe answer it as best you can in terms of just in general, because I see a lot of people asking things like, if you're not born in Western Cape, will you be kicked out? What is the conditions? Are you someone that has to have been living here? If you're foreign, do you have to have lived here for 4 years, then you can stay here? If you're already here, do you still stay here? Are people going to be moved? And then what are you going to do about people that want to come in? Are there going to be laws? Are there going to be regulations? That kind of stuff.
Okay, look, so essentially, we're just going to do, look, first of all, we're a pressure group, so fundamentally, it's not our decision to make, but I can tell you what we would like to happen, and I think will almost certainly will happen. So I did an analysis of the G20 countries, so the sort of the sort of major 20 economies in the world, and I looked to see what their laws were around immigration, and citizenship, and they were virtually identical. They only varied in one aspect, and I'll come to that now. And then I looked at South Africa's own laws, and they're exactly the same too. So there's almost a template of what the rules are. So we haven't got to reinvent the wheel. And I think nobody can dispute the moral authority if we use the same rules that the UK, France, Germany, Italy, South Africa itself, the US, blah blah blah, all use. And essentially there's a set of criteria, and there are slight variations, but in essence, either you were born there, or your parents were born there, or you live there already, or then there are other criteria by which you then, so that would be your natural citizenship. You can have citizenship by birth, you can have citizenship by descent, you can have citizenship by residency, and then you can naturalize, so you can come into the country, and there will be a whole set of criteria, just as there are for South Africa, albeit that they're not properly implemented. So, the irony is we talk about South Africa as how easy it is for people to come into the country. What we mean is how easy it is to come into the country illegally. I came to South Africa 16 years ago legally, and I can absolutely promise you, easy it is not. If you're going to do it officially, I came in on a business permit, but I mean. So the sort of standard things are you would be born there, your parents would be born there, you can come in on a skills permit because you've got skills that the country needs. You can come in as an investor, you can come in to establish a business, you can come in on a study permit, you can come in on a retirement visa. These are all absolute international norms. So there's no question that anybody first of all is going to be sent home. I think people will retain their existing status. So if you're a citizen of South Africa and your permanent residence is in the Western Cape, you'll be a citizen of the Western Cape, and you'll probably be able to have dual citizenship between the two countries. That would make complete sense. If you are actually you permanently reside in the rest of South Africa, but you're currently in the Western Cape, I suspect that you'll have residency status in the Western Cape. So we're not looking to send anybody home. I think ultimately, we want independence for the people of the Western Cape. There's 6 million people of the Western Cape. There's 3.11 million voters currently. They are the people that will decide, and they are the people who will make up the. And actually, those people are the people now. Regardless, we can forget their race, we can forget their language, we can forget everything. Those are the people that are currently dismissing the ANC government at the poll. That is the people who of whom only 28.6% want an ANC government. So ideologically, they are the people who want a different form of government, and they will make up the population of the Western Cape. For other people that want to come into the Western Cape, there will be ample opportunities to come to, so long as you can contribute to the country. What will stop will be this, obviously, economic migration of people that aren't skilled. And I think in terms of I think we make no apology for that. I think ultimately, we're in a situation where charity has to start at home. We have got literally millions of people living in poverty in the Western Cape, who are unemployed, who are living in terrible conditions, and who actually have a chance of a better life. And we're not. And our first and foremost requirement in the Western Cape is to develop an attractive, functional economy that creates people jobs and opportunity, and out of that we will solve poverty, we will solve housing, we will solve inequality, but by doing the fundamentals right, and that requires us. So the people that are here absolutely will get helped, and people who can come into the country, who can contribute to helping the people of the Western Cape do better, well, great, but we will stem the flow of people who are coming for the wrong, no, who could say the wrong reasons? Economic migration is not a wrong reason; it's desperation. And I would never want to be in that situation myself, and I would have huge empathy. But actually, at some point, your economy can only cope with so many people, and I think, and from that point of view, all of the people that we've spoken to in the Western Cape, regardless of their race, they all agree that they want closed borders. So we'll have closed borders. And when people say, well, how would the border work? The best example is they, well, look, how does the border work between South Africa and Namibia, who are at one point were effectively one country? There's a border post, you can cross over it, you can have dual citizenship, you can have business on both sides of the borders. It's really not a problem. But Namibia is Namibia, and it's got the Namibian government, and South Africa is South Africa, it's got a South African government, and we'll have the same situation. The Western Cape will have its own government, have its own borders, will have its own passport, and South Africa will be a different country. But obviously there will be neighbours, and we'll have trading relationships, and we'll all have friends and family either side of the border, and we'll come and go just as we do now. But actually, we'll now be crossing over an international border as opposed to a provincial border.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the things that one of the options that appeals to, I think will appeal to a lot of people, will be that the option exists for well, let me just start it this way. One of the biggest things that makes the ANC such a terrible government is their racial discrimination. Okay, they discriminate against all minorities. I mean, white people first, but I mean, that carries a lot less moral weight these days. So I wouldn't worry about that one. The thing is, I think colored people are quite fed up with being second-class citizens. They were second-class citizens under the previous regime, and they're still second-class citizens now. And the sort of strength that the government keeps exerting on them, like having the army patrol through their neighborhoods, not to really do anything about gangs. I mean, I don't think anybody who understands South African politics really believes that they were trying to do anything there. I think it was an intimidation move. But I mean, you've got this hostile environment in South Africa where if you're a minority, you must put up or shut up, and they've had this position since the Morogoro Conference in 1968, where they decided that the leadership of the country can never include minorities. They can be allies, but they're not part of the decision-making process, and that includes Indians and coloreds. And that's been the policy of the ANC ever since. Occasionally, they'll have a little token minority here or there if they, someone who understands finance, but broadly speaking, the ANC is a black supremacist movement and always has been. And one of the things that we can do regarding immigration that has a strong moral basis to it is you can provide a fast track to citizenship for those who are discriminated against. And all the ANC has to do to change that policy would be to remove their own racial discrimination policies, and they won't have a problem with the brain drain. But until such a thing happens, they're going to face a lot of their sort of educated minorities leaving the country for the Western Cape. And I think that would be an ideal way of structuring an immigration policy regarding our former dominant power. I think that is a very sound way of proceeding, because you simply can't proceed on the basis of anything immoral if you're going to found your country. And a lot of people who might be prone to panic and think of all kinds of nasty projects regarding black areas in the Western Cape that they worry might vote for socialist parties. I think that they're just going to have to swallow the fact that there will be differences of political opinion. There's never going to be an end to politics. Politics continues. What we're simply trying to do is we're trying to provide a place where we can demonstrate that good governance is possible on this continent, and that we can provide a better life for people and shield them from the violent, predatory, and autocratic nature of the ruling party's power system, which consistently keeps eroding infrastructure and institutions and morality and breaking down the people. I mean, if you just look at, for just one dimension, the one that is the most salient, I think, for anyone around is crime. More people have died since democracy began than have died in the Afghan war. And that's a war that's been raging for more than 20 years now. It's an intolerable condition that we're living in at the moment. Absolutely intolerable. And I think the colored people bear the brunt of this because they have the highest homicide rate anywhere in the country. One of the highest homicide rates anywhere in the world. The Cape Flats is a literal war zone. And this is because you have money flowing in from, international drug cartels. You have money flowing in from the ANC. I mean, Zuma was met with the heads of the Cape gangs a few years ago, in order to try and exert control in the region. But they won't send police. They won't give extra funding to the police in order to enforce the law. They're not there to protect the colored people. They're there to disrupt their communities and break them down. And it's not like, the white rule before them was any better. I mean, we all know the stories of Mandrax flooding in through contacts with the security forces and all of that kind of stuff. It's not, it's not as if there's one race who ought to rule and one race who ought not to rule. I think this is an awful fallacy. It's more about what is the state of politics right now? What are the choices we are facing in this moment? South Africa could completely transform itself in a couple of generations, and become something totally different. But I think we can't wait for them to do that because it's now a matter of survival. We're talking about the quite serious possibility of a total collapse of the country. And I think in those circumstances, with the biggest voices in politics being the ones who are calling for revenge on minorities, violent revenge on minorities, I think that I don't think we can afford to play the silly electoral games that we're being told we ought to. And I know that a lot of people in the Cape Peninsula who live in nice, quiet houses are telling us, no, this, you can't have any doubt in the system because that constitutes a form of swart gevaar. What they're really saying is that minorities should never object to any form of tyranny imposed on them by the majority in any form or any way. You can point out bad apples, but you can never criticize the system. And that I think is a pattern of rhetoric that must be condemned, because it is in defense of the powers that be. It is facilitating their parasitic and predatory nature, and it is facilitating their blatant racism. And I don't think that we can tolerate that anymore. I've spoken to, look, I've burned all of my bridges now with my former friends in the ANC, but the last conversation I had with him, you know what the plans that they were talking about, they were boasting with, because silly people running their mouths. The plans that they were talking about were copying the Chinese political model, but with a more aggressive racial strategy. Now we all know what the Chinese ethnic management strategy is, and we can see that the ANC conducts the vast majority of its politics through informal channels. So if we just look at the superficial pattern of behavior in South Africa, where you're having every educational institution is teaching that the minorities are complicit with some kind of evil, that they have degenerate cultural traits. You're having populations being moved with financial and organizational backing into key districts to dilute them. You're having aggressive dispossession of minority properties. What you're really seeing is sort of a more gentle and more incompetent version of what China was doing 10 years ago. And what you're going to be seeing in South Africa in a few years' time is a less gentle and more chaotic version of what China is doing now. And it's an intolerable prospect. And I don't think that anybody who's lived in South Africa or has been reading the news in South Africa can possibly say that this is outside the realm of reality. The radical hostility that the ANC has to even their own people as they see it, which is the black race, is extraordinary. The level of inhumanity that they subject the ordinary South African to is, I think, an unforgivable state of affairs.
You said quite a lot there that is some scary stuff, and I see people in the comments wanting to know more about that, but that's, I think, for another hour discussion, which I'll have you back for. I think we can all agree that, and I think, so I want to touch on this just a little bit, the aspect that people think that this movement itself is racist. That people are trying to hold on to the white privilege and stuff like that. And Rob brings up a very good point that, like, the majority in Western Cape is actually colored. That these people have been somewhat oppressed to a certain degree by the previous regime and currently now. So, Phil, what do you have to say about that?
Okay, I'll come to that. There's a couple of things I just want to pick up on that, Rob, which are interesting. So look, and I guess look. So first of all, there's an interesting statistic that you look at. So I always look. I'm a real numbers person. My mother was a maths teacher, and I see the world in numbers. Like when I looked at the Matrix, I thought that was me. That's how I actually see the world. So there's some really interesting concepts here, and I agree with what Rob said. Look, at the end of the day, I'm probably a far more moderate version of there, but the issues are fundamentally the same. As always, so I guess I'm one of life's optimists, and I see beyond race, and I don't see that race has to be something that destroys us, but I understand that it's a factor of things. So, here's an interesting thing. So obviously we talk about, and there's a lot of talk about. To what extent it happens, I don't know, but there's a lot of talk, and obviously we do know there's been significant migration of black citizens from the Eastern Cape to the Western Cape over the period of the last 10 years. And the assumption is that this will now strengthen the ANC's vote. It will change the nature of the demographic and the ideological basis of the Western Cape. Now, here's the interesting thing, and I don't dispute that there is that migration. That's a matter of fact. What really gives hope is actually what's happened over that 10 years. Has the ANC's vote gone up or gone down? In actual fact, that the ANC is losing, whilst the black population of the Western Cape is increasing, the ANC and the EFS share of the vote is decreasing. And so that itself is quite an interesting scenario. And I think there's a degree of cultural assimilation going on. And it comes back to our whole argument that essentially the difference between the Western Cape and South Africa is an ideological difference. And and what tends to happen in cultures is people come to the Western Cape and they find a country that is, or a part of the country. I'm saying a country because that's what I want it to be, a different country, and that actually is fundamentally more functional. And we have all of this notion that people are talking about, but in reality, people come and they can see on the ground, and therefore, and if you look at the DA, their policy conference last weekend, they formally adopted non-racialism of policy, and the outcome of that is that they have rejected BEE, they've rejected affirmative action. Now the person that proposed that policy with the DA was black. Actually, some of the key advocates of that policy are black. So I think we have to understand that this isn't necessarily a racial issue. It's an ANC issue, and so that's the first thing in terms of the Western Cape. And I guess what we want to do is we need to protect that. We have that ideology, and now we just need to separate it off to the Western Cape with all of its diverse population. And bear in mind, the Western Cape population is far more ethnically diverse than South Africa itself. That actually we can create the rainbow nation as it was supposed to be. We can have this situation where actually there's a kind of an ethnic balance that's quite comfortable in the Western Cape, and means that effectively we're all minorities. All of the population of the West, and therefore we're going to be a population of minorities where we all can respect each other's culture. It's a far more healthy situation. So I see a lot of positives in there that are not negatives. Then the second one is we talked about the coloured people, and I've got a real heart for the coloured people. I really love. Look, I have a heart for all people. That's not again as white or black. But I agree they've had a real rough thing, and the real evil of the oppression of coloured people in the Western Cape is the imposition of national demographics on the Western Cape, so that you have this notion that the coloured people who make up half the population, but they don't get half the government jobs, they don't get half of the corporate jobs, because effectively we've got quotas by other means. And I'm always amazed that it's never politically become an issue. For me, if you want to see the injustice of national demographics, then actually stop applying BE and affirmative action by race and apply it by home language, and it'll be solved overnight. Because all of a sudden, now the cause of people make up, say, I don't know what the number is, let's say 15% of the population of the Western Cape. Now 15% of all jobs in KZN must go to Causa people. 20% of all jobs must go to, and actually you'd suddenly see the insanity. You'd have rioting overnight, because now fundamentally you're trying to impose a people upon a territory from which they didn't come from. And I think I clearly don't want to implement that policy, but I'm just suggesting, so then you can see how pernicious it is in the Western Cape that coloured people are excluded from the economy on the basis of applying national demographics. So I think those two things are issues that have to be resolved, and absolutely in Cape Independence resolve. Coming to your third point, and is in terms of the polling, you talked about the ethnic mix of people, and that's one of the great findings of the poll. And again, one of the big things that was dismissed. There was always this talk of it being a white movement, but here we have the numbers now. 56% of Cape Independence supporters are coloured, 16% are black, 28% are white. So actually, this is something that's embraced by all races, obviously in different proportions, but effectively, there's no notion that this is a white movement. This is an ideological movement. The majority of the supporters, which are coloured.
Yeah, my comment on that would be, I don't think we have to worry about convincing people that whether or not it's racist or not. I think it's very simple. We ask whether or not it's the right thing to do. I think that unless there's a magical transformation in Pretoria tomorrow, or there's a massive change in the zeitgeist over the next few years, and everyone suddenly changes their political philosophy overnight. I think that this is the right thing to do. As for the talk of multiculturalism, look, the Cape's been multicultural for hundreds of years. We are one of the few places in the world where Christians and Muslims have no beef with each other. I mean, you think about that for a second. Everywhere else in the world where Christians and Muslims live side by side, there are deep, deep, deep beefs between them. In the Cape, it's just not. They get along like, peanut butter and jam. And the thing that we can look at over here is also Singapore. No, we know there are countries like Singapore that they're not all that common, I have to admit, that get along very well between ethnicities. They don't have, and I think that most of that is the imposition of order. If there's order, if there's rule of law, if people feel secure, then they feel that they can trust people. And then all of these little differences of race and class and ideology and all of that kind of stuff really melts away because your environment is secure. Now, most people in South Africa are not used to a high trust environment. We're extremely paranoid. We're extremely distrustful of one another. We live in an environment which is chaotic, dark, and violent all the time. Everything is uncertain. Everything is breaking. Anyone could betray you at any minute. This is how we've been trained to think in the society that we've lived in for the past few decades. You leave South Africa and you come to a functioning country where rule of law is respected. People have the psychology is so transformative. Since I've been here in the Netherlands, it is the Netherlands is extremely multicultural. You go into any city, it's there's a lot of different people rubbing shoulders, and what you get is everyone is relaxed. The energy is in South Africa is everyone's sitting with PTSD. Everyone is sitting with some form of PTSD. You come to the Netherlands, it's like someone is injecting heroin directly into your spinal column. Everything is so relaxed. It's so relaxed because everything works. You go to the train station, the train is on time. At most, it'll be late by 5 minutes. At most. You a policeman and you ask him for help, he greets you with a friendly smile and asks you, how's your day and how can I help you? He doesn't tell you, what's this nonsense, don't come to me with your shit, like every police officer in South Africa does. He's not going to solicit a bribe from you. He's not going to beat you in the jail cell. He's not going to rape you. He's not going to rob you. The police it's the transformative effect of a society run by rule of law with a strict and serious approach to violations of public order and violations of human rights and violations of civil rights and breaches of law. The effect that has on people is that it makes them more trusting, more civil to one another, kinder to one another. And we need that. We living in South Africa need that desperately. And being able to demonstrate to the rest of the country that it's possible to achieve this will have an enormous effect on them too. Being able to show that it can be done, that this awful downward slide can be halted and reversed, will not just save the Western Cape. It will save the rest of the country by showing a good example. And I think that that's what we have to hope for. That's what we have to look forward to, is not that we are looking after ourselves, but that we can show everyone how to do good and how to save ourselves from disaster and from this constant charnel house that we've been living in for I don't know, let's say the past 50, 60 years. That it's possible to get out of it. That it's possible to create something different. And the Cape is that opportunity as far as I can see.
Okay, so we're pretty much on the hour mark. So in closing, sorry, I don't mean to dismiss anything you've said, Rob. I do agree with you.
No.
But I do have to try and keep it to
Time
an hour.
frame.
Yeah, time frame. I see a lot of comments. I think maybe we should have another discussion about this. There's so much to unpack. We'll see if we can. But I think this was a good starting point, and I think that we do need to maybe tackle some other aspects of this. However, we titled this Cape Independence. Is it still a fantasy, or is it now a reality? So, in brief, give your opinions about that in as brief as you can. We'll start with Rob this time.
Is it a fantasy or is it reality? I think at this stage, it's kind of looking like a bit of both. Certainly, there's hope, but we have to face facts that there's an enormous uphill battle that is going to be by no means certain. Victory is never guaranteed. And there are a lot of spoiler factors. There are a lot of people who will go out of their way to destroy any possibility of hope here. And that blind optimism is not a healthy mind frame, but positivity is. And my approach to all things of this shape recently in my life and more broadly in politics has been that, you've got to look at it. No matter how dark things get, you don't try and put on rose-tinted glasses. You accept facts, and you look at what needs to be done, and if it needs to be done, you do it. And there's no croaking, there's no negativity. We will achieve this because we have to. And this is what I take away from Nelson Mandela, which no matter how much he gets maligned by the white right or the black left, I don't know why they're called right and left. They have more in common with each other than anything else. They both regard him as either some form of terrorist or sellout, and no one seems to agree that he's a decent man. And I think I increasingly, every time I revisit his biography or his Rivonia speech or anything else, I recognize that he had a very good balance of principles and pragmatism, and his approach to matters of political necessity, saying that they must be achieved by any means necessary, but not by any means available. That careful balance of pragmatism, of principle, and of moral restraint, I think, is one that needs to be heeded by anyone who's going to face a power as daunting, powerful, and intimidating as the South African state and the African National Congress.
All right, and Craig.
Well, so interesting. Is it a fantasy? Is it reality? And I think it's neither. It's a possibility, and it's a possibility where we have an ability to affect the outcome. And at this point in time, as a bet, the odds have got shorter. We've moved the needle significantly towards independence. And a lot of the things that are going on behind the scenes, and obviously we clearly can't talk about everything that's happening, but there's some really positive things going on behind the scenes, which means that on a daily basis we become more and more positive. And I think just looking at some of the things that they might be, obviously the poll itself was hugely significant. And very positive. I think the DA coming out at its policy conference last week and talking about federalism and wanting to increase power, and we hear from our connections in the DA that part of that is the DA has been emboldened by the independence movement, and just understand that federalism or independence are different train stations on the same track. The people get off a little earlier if they get off at federal autonomy. Independence is staying on to the end of the journey. So the DA are moving in the right direction. The poll is showing that the population is moving in the right direction. There's definitely interest in the groundswell of public opinion. There's definitely a battle to be fought. But at this point in time, I would say it's a battle that we're winning. It's a possibility. It's becoming more likely, not less likely.
All right. And in my personal opinion, I still I'm in between because I can't. I see Rob's point. I see Craig's point. For me, I want to see more action. I'm one of those. I want to see more action. I want to see more people, I guess, talking about. I know the lockdown has restricted a lot of this from happening in terms of marketing campaigns and people going on the ground and doing and talking and making more noise about that. Obviously, So I understand that, but I hope that once, I think a big telling of is this going to be even more possible and more of a reality is once lockdown is completely over. I don't think, I think there's going to be a wall that will hit if there's lockdown because of the regulations and the restrictions. But we'll see. I'm keeping a close eye on the Cape Independence Advocacy Group and Cape Party. But yeah, I do want to state that I support it, but I'm very skeptical about it.
And don't forget the Cape Colored Congress. They may be small now, but I think they're quite serious.
Yes, absolutely. Like I said, for those of you who have watched this, thank you guys so much. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe. Zane Lawrence, I did see you subscribe, so thank you so much for subscribing. For those of you that watched, once again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this was informative. I hope that this will get you thinking about the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. And please support them. The links to their website is in the description below. You can follow Craig on Twitter and Cape Independence Advocacy Group. You can also follow Rob on Twitter, and please subscribe to his channel as well. He's got some really interesting videos on his channel. Please, I highly recommend that you go check him out. And yeah, so guys, once again, thank you so much. Don't go anywhere just yet. We'll discuss if we feel that we need to take this matter even further. But yes, thank you guys so much for watching. And I will be back tonight for another show with fellow comedians. Funny You Should Say That show, where we're going to talk about something very sensitive, but it needs to be spoken about. We're going to be talking about sexual harassment in the comedy industry. And we're going to have a guest on our show as well, talking about it. So if you're keen, please join us at 8:30 for Funny You Should Say That. If I don't see you tonight, then stay safe, be kind to one another, and I'll see you at the next one. Cheers. Hey guys, so if you enjoyed the show, please consider giving it a like and a share. Don't forget to subscribe as well if you're new to my channel. And if you really enjoyed the content, feel free to join and become a member. Don't forget about my fight against cancel culture. That's in the link in the description below. Support my fight against cancel culture. Go to that link and all the information is there. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching.